Hi, welcome back to The Basement. I'm Steve Lewis. Today we continue the conversation with David Leaf, author of the recently updated God Only Knows, the story of Brian Wilson, the Beach Boys, and the California Myth. Not only did David Leaf write the landmark book about Brian Wilson, I was reminded during the conversation that he was also responsible for shepherding some of the Beach Boys' early archival releases, such as the Good Vibrations box set from 1993, the Pet Sound Session box set, and for documenting the rebirth of Smile, if you can call it that, in the film Beautiful Dreamer. We've been very fortunate to have a true fan and someone with such good taste to be in charge of these early releases. He set a very high standard that fortunately has been carried on by Alan Boyd and company. So there's another reason to be thankful for David Leaf. Again, remember, the book makes a great gift. And at the end of this episode, David will talk about the God Only Knows VIP experience very briefly. There's a link in the description. It sounds like a really good cause. I urge you to check that out, as well as to order these for your holiday giving. So without further ado, we return to the conversation. And we're back with David Leaf. I saw Brian live this summer on the co-headlining tour that he did with Chicago. It was what I kind of expected. My read of it was basically Brian's band with Alan and Blondie, and Brian was in attendance. He sang a line here or there, and that was okay. I feel like if Brian wants to take a victory lap or two at this point, I'm happy just to see him there, as long as he wants to be there, of course. Do you have any thoughts on his current touring?
Absolutely. If you ask Brian, if you go to his house and say, hey, Brian, what do you want to do? He says, I want to go on tour. Why does he want to be on tour? Well, he's got this great band. His musicians are like his family. They're recreating his music. He loves hearing his music being played well. He loves the response from the audience. He doesn't show it. I can't explain why. And he loves a good room service steak.
Okay, well, that's good to hear. I mean, I noticed that he was very keyed into usually whoever was singing lead or, but his interest seemed to stop at the edge of the stage the night I saw him anyway.
Last fall when he toured, he was omnipresent on every song, singing strongly.
Oh, yeah.
So, why this year was different. That's why the book is called God Only Knows, because there are certain things that are inexplicable.
Yeah, and also wanted to talk about the Pet Sounds box, if we could talk about that a little bit.
I'm in your basement. You get to talk about anything.
Of course, it's a really fascinating and enjoyable set and gave us this incredible access into the making of the album. I remember when this came out, I think one of the reviews I read said, this is the kind of thing that has been done for jazz albums, but this is a new thing for rock albums, this kind of really academic, almost dissection of the music. And if it's successful, we might see a lot more of it. And since then, we've seen the Beatles, the deluxe sessions, the Dylan certainly releasing every take of Blood on the Tracks. Thank you for pioneering that.
Thank you. I don't know how much credit I deserve, because the conversation started with Brian and I after the success of the Good Vibrations box, where we had put some backing tracks, and of course, Capitol had done Stack of Tracks 50-something years ago. But Pet Sounds is the kind of album that deserves that kind of treatment. And this is no BS. I'm a fan. What do I, as a fan, want to see and hear? That was always what guided me in everything I did. What I wanted to hear was Pet Sounds in mono, Pet Sounds in stereo, the tracks without the vocals and the vocals without the tracks.
Yeah.
And as much of the sessions as we could get on there. I'm very proud of it. We got a Grammy nomination. And at the Grammys, they have two different Grammy awards. They have the one you see on television, where they give out a dozen awards. And then there's a pre-show where they give out about 100 awards very quickly. And that was the category the Pet Sound Sessions box was in Best Historical Recording. And Phil Ramone was hosting that section of the show. And when he said, and the winner is, Brian stood up. He presumed, after hearing what our competition was, that we were going to win. And we didn't. So it was disappointing. But, Brian said many years ago that the gift is in the doing. The reward is in the doing. So we did it. We got it out there. The same with my book. There are some people who will love the update, and there were some people who will grumble that there's not enough about the Beach Boys in there. But the reward was in the doing, and I couldn't wait to get up every morning and write. I didn't want to stop writing at the end of the day. It was really thrilling to be able to tell the story of the journey that I had been on, because I had never really talked about it in either of the first or the second edition in terms of how did this all happen.
Well, the update, of course, is so different because the writer and the subject have become so entwined that the update is very different. It's almost like a first person narrative.
It's partly that, but again, it's on the reader. What can I give the reader that they can't get anywhere else? Because you can go to Wikipedia and see, you name it, you put any album in Google and you'll see a long story of the album. Well, the only thing that isn't on Wikipedia is the journey that I went on with Brian. And and so telling about the behind the scenes story of the solo album, the Radio City tribute, the making of Beautiful Dreamer, that's what I could offer. Mike Grant, who's a dear old fan and friend from England, he emailed me. He hadn't finished the update. He says, I feel like I'm reading your diary. And I wrote back to him, is that good or bad? And he said, I'll let you know when I get to the end. Um, I wish I'd kept a diary. It's
Yeah,
unfortunate that I didn't,
yeah.
because at the time we were too busy doing it. Everyone in the Beach Boys world has their story to tell. My story was about Brian Wilson and how he came out of this incredible darkness and found his way into the musical light. It's a story of redemption and it's a celebration. And you know, it's you can't be all things to all people. It's like he didn't write much about the 2012 50th reunion tour, and it's like I didn't go to the concert. What am I supposed to say?
Yeah.
When I sat down to start working on the update, the first thing I did was read the 1985 edition of the book, which I hadn't read in a very long time. And the only part of it I didn't like was the codetta, the chapter in the 85 update that it's like 1977 to 1985, something like that, because that
Right.
was kind of a historical recitation. And it didn't seem all that interesting to me because it was at a time when they were breaking up and falling apart and Carl was leaving the band. And I was like, this is grim. So it's like this is not a good story. When I wrote the 78 book, as I've described before, I was really on a mission in the 1970s to bring Brian Wilson's story to the world in a way they would stop thinking about him. Oh, he's the guy from the Beach Boys. Brian Wilson is a big deal, everybody. Pay attention to this guy. Well, I don't have to do that anymore. You know,
Yeah.
the world knows who he is.
So many of us, either directly or indirectly, owe a debt to you and the Beach Boys and the California Myth for drawing our attention to how important
Thank
this
you.
music was. And your part in Beach Boy history, just for opening people's eyes to it, I just don't think can be overstated. So thank you for that.
Thank you. I really didn't understand it. And there's a section in the introductory part of the new edition where I'm kind of, Elliot Easton from the Cars telling me what I had done, and Tom Petty, and Van Dyke, and Darian, and it's like, oh, okay. I guess if you guys say I did it, I did it.
Another thing I wanted to be sure to touch on was the 1988 solo album. I remember sitting on Venice Beach reading the review in the LA Times of this and thinking, I cannot wait until Tuesday or whatever the release day was in those days. And, listening to it, this is, Love and Mercy is pretty good, and, Melt Away. And then when it got to Rio Grande, wow, this is just mind-blowingly cool. Again, it was like fan fiction. This is exactly what we want from Brian Wilson.
Yeah, you really have to credit Lenny Waronker at Warner Brothers for pushing Brian and Andy to do something like that, Andy Paley, because Seymour Stein was like, I think I want an album of songs. And Lenny was like, no, I want things like Cabinessence. I want him to expand. Lenny had been around during the Smile era. He and Van Dyke were best friends going back to the Smile era.
Oh.
So he had been there for the heartbreak of the Smile dissolution. So it was remarkable. Melt Away is certainly one of my favorites. I love Let It Shine because it's joyous. And unlike the other songs on the album, excluding Rio Grande, Brian's lead on that, I think, is really, it's almost a Beach Boyish lead.
Mm.
Where on Love and Mercy and some of the others, he's singing in his adult voice. Let It Shine feels like, okay, that's what I imagined 10 years ago.
Were Andy Paley and Brian resistant to doing a suite, or was it just not?
No.
Okay.
Not resistant. When Lenny first brought it up, it was given the name Life's Suite, as in life is
Okay.
sweet, not by Andy or by the man whose name rhymes with Andy. It was Landy.
Mm.
And he was writing the lyrics with his fiancee or girlfriend or wife.
Oh.
I never quite knew what her position was.
Yeah.
The team that was assembled fought really hard to get Landy's lyrics off and Brian's lyrics on, despite the songwriting credits on the original release. You can hear a Brian Wilson lyric. I mean, who else says crummy movie with my hand on my
Right.
chin? I mean, it's just, you know,
Right.
it's just, he has a way of writing that is very straightforward.
Yeah.
And he's a great lyricist. He tells you exactly what's on his mind. Time to Get Alone. And boy, he's getting ready to disappear, isn't he?
Yeah. Yeah.
Like he is who he is. It's a miracle that we've gotten what we've gotten. You know, with the 78 edition of the book and with the 85 edition of the book, they were not happy endings. They were hopeful in the least hopeful possibility. It was like, okay, he's alive, so there's hope.
Right.
As my grandparents said, where there's life, there's hope. That's a pretty slim thread to go forward on. With this edition, I'm looking back and celebrating. He got to 80.
Yeah.
And we got what we got. And if we don't hear another note from him or the group, we're well beyond what we could have ever expected in 77, 87, 97, etc.
Yeah.
It's pretty remarkable.
Yeah. For those of us who saw him 40 years ago, these last 40 years, you know, you can always ask for more, but this has been miraculous what we've gotten.
Well, yeah, and that's part of context and perspective. Could there have been more? Sure. Could things have been more successful? Sure. But that's not the way I'm looking at it. I'm looking at it and saying, look at what we got. As I wrote in the book, when it was first announced Brian was going on tour, I thought, well, that's the worst idea I've ever heard. And if he doesn't go on tour, we don't get any of the things we got. There's no Pet Sounds Live. There's no Brian Wilson Presents Smile.
Right.
There's no Lucky Old Son. There's no Gershwin. I mean, none of that stuff happens if he doesn't get the confidence that began in Ann Arbor. It's really lucky we've been able as fans to give back to him in person. And as you said, you know, if he wants to just be in the room, you know, somebody was asking me about this last tour. I said, you know, if George Gershwin was touring Rhapsody in Blue and he was just sitting on the side watching, would you go? And the answer was, yeah. And so, you know, that's kind of, you know, where we feel. As long as he wants to do it, it's not easy given his physical challenges.
But I admire the fact that if he still wants to do it, that he's not letting the physical challenges prevent him from doing it.
Nothing has ever prevented him from doing what he wanted to do. He's a really strong character. When he decided he wasn't going to do anything, it was like, I'm going to hold my breath. Nothing's going to get me out of bed.
Right.
You know, people talk about him being in bed for years. He wasn't in bed for years. There were a couple of years where he said, I'm too fat to go out. I'm embarrassed. You know, and he was a night owl. So he'd go over to Danny Hutton's house and hang out. So if you came home at 6 o'clock in the morning, you'd go to bed. And then if 11 o'clock that day, somebody said, where's Brian? Oh, he's in bed. Well, sure, he's in bed. He's sleeping.
Okay.
He just was on a different calendar clock than the rest of us.
Oh, sure. That makes sense.
If he were normal, he wouldn't be Brian Wilson and we wouldn't have gotten the music we got. I think Brian's autobiography that came out in 2016 is very, very good. I think it captures his voice well. But ultimately, if you want to know Brian Wilson's story, you listen to the music. I mean, if he's upset, he writes a song called Cry.
Yeah.
No, it's really not that complicated. He's a sincere, sweet, he's the nicest person. It's just not easy. He wrote a song. It's not easy being me, right? I mean, it's
Yeah.
it isn't. I mean, he has battled demons. He has battled voices in his head. He has battled people taking control of his life and over medicating him.
Mm.
And he came out on the other end of it. And I think the idea of the book is it's the hero's journey. There's no reason to expect great new music from Brian or the group. I mean, it's just unlikely. I'm happy to be proven wrong. The book is retrospective. I'm now an elder statesman looking back at what happened and what I experienced and what I got right, and in some cases, didn't get right. And the book is meant to be, as I said, a celebration for what we got, not a woulda, shoulda, coulda been, but here's what we got. How amazing is that?
Yeah. Plenty to be grateful for.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate your time. And again, thanks for all the great work. It's really been a pleasure talking to you. You've really shaped my enjoyment of the Beach Boys music. So because of the reading that I've done with you, it's enhanced a lot of pleasure I've gotten out of Brian's music over the years. So thank you for that as well.
Thank you. That's the ultimate goal, is for me to be giving insight into people who love the music and want to understand the artist. Just one plug, at my website, we have what's called the God Only Knows VIP experience, which is raising money for the Brian Wilson Scholarship at UCLA.
Oh.
If people would want to participate in that, it's a limited edition, signed copy of the book, and there are some collectibles that are available as well.
Great.
If any of your viewers are flush and feeling like they want to support the next Brian
Great.
Wilson.
All right, I'll provide a link in the
Thank you.
description.
Thank you so much, Stephen. Invite me back into the basement again.
That would be terrific. Thanks so much for coming to the basement. I appreciate your time. It's wonderful talking to you.
Great talking to you, Steve.
Bye, Dave.
Take care.
So there you have it. Thanks for watching. Do check out that God Only Knows VIP experience if you get a chance. I want to thank David again for his time and for all the very interesting stories and insights. One thing that I think I have learned about Brian Wilson, having recently spoken to Stephen Kalinich and now having talked to David Leaf, is Brian has some very lovely friends. Also, speaking of lovely people, I want to thank Martin Steele once again for the virtual introduction that made this possible. We'll see you next week. Hopefully we'll start talking about pop culture in the year 1972, leading up to a discussion of Carl and the Passion So Tough. I look forward to your comments as always. Please hit like and subscribe if you don't mind, and we will see you next time. Thanks again. Bye.